Hi everyone, welcome to another weekly reading recap video. I'm Matt. You might know me as the Indie Reader on Instagram. And each week I like to give a little recap of what I've been reading, along with some of my favorite books and other updates from the world of literature as well as nonfiction, in particular history. So this week, I've been really spending most of my time with two novels. The first novel is Gate of the Sun by Elias Khoury and translated by Humphrey Davies. And this is put out from Archipelago Press. This is a novel, a Palestinian novel, about the displacement and killing of Palestinians after 1948. And their struggles to reestablish and find a kind of a homeland or a place to settle in the years following. Our main protagonist is a Dr. Khalil, who is a former freedom fighter turned medical doctor who's at the bedside of his dying adopted father, who was a major fighter, revolutionary fighter, who is slowly passing away and is in a coma in the hospital. And it's basically Dr. Khalil telling his father about all the lives and the suffering of the people in their community in Palestine and later in Lebanon after they're displaced. It's a very difficult read. I mean, there's a lot of suffering and death in this novel, unsurprisingly. But you know that you're in for a book that is going to be impactful when most of the comparisons of this novel are the Odyssey and the Book of Exodus. So it's a book that has a real grand scope and is an impressive attempt to try to tell the story of a people. It's also beautifully written, and the translation is incredible as well. It's written in a stream of consciousness style, so it moves at a quick pace. But unlike other stream of consciousness books, it doesn't rush, which can be an issue, I think, with some books that try to use stream of consciousness as a way to kind of rush the story forward. It also is an incredible book at looking at many different perspectives in Palestine and the ways that displacement has fundamentally transformed and in many cases broken their lives. There are so many characters in this book, and you only get glimpses of some. But as a whole, you really get to understand not only the diversity of a people, but the common struggles that bring them together and unite them. There's also, if for folks that are looking for novels that have strong female characters in it, Gate of the Sun is, so far at least, I'm about halfway through, really carried by its female characters and has very strong women throughout the book as kind of keepers of memory and preservers of culture as their men, their husbands, their brothers, their sons die either as revolutionary freedom fighters or just as part of the displacement process. Again, this is a very difficult read. It deals with sensitive and challenging topics. It's also quite long at over 500 pages. But I think for anybody that's interested in reading more Palestinian literature, works in Arabic that are translated into English, I think Gate of the Sun, if not a starting point, is definitely a book that should be on your list of books to read. I've been splitting time with a book that's on the opposite end of the spectrum in pretty much every way, which is Stanley Elkin's George Mills. So this is a novel, mid-20th century novel by Stanley Elkin, who was a writer and professor at the Washington University of St. Louis. If that sounds like a familiar path, it's very similar to the path trod by William H. Gass, the novelist who wrote The Tunnel, as well as Omenstedter's Luck. And Elkin in some ways has lived in Gass's sort of shadow as a novelist, but he's really starting to get his due in the last couple years with the republishing of many of his novels by the Dalkey Essential series. So a few of them are already out, including The Magic Kingdom, but it sounds like there's going to be more releases of his novels and more reprints of his novels coming in the next couple of years, which is something very exciting to look forward to. George Mills is a bit of a mess of a novel, to be totally honest. It's beautifully written in some points. It's very ambitious. My selling point of it is that it is a incredibly ambitious novel that is about a lack of ambition. So it looks at a lineage of George Millses, which are these men who are of English extraction, and who live these kind of boring, mediocre lives, usually on kind of the margins of society as janitors and other sorts of small-time workers, but never improve, never rise above their station, never have anybody who is of exceptional talent. And Elkin uses this as a way of kind of poking fun at the idea of meritocracy, but also just generally making a lot of jokes about social stratification, class. And Elkin is a hilarious writer. He's very, very funny. It's one of the few books that I've read this year that has a lot of just one-liner jokes, as well as these kind of sprawling setup jokes. So it's a high joke density, funny book, but it's a real craftsman's novel. Like, it's beautifully written. The sentence level writing is great. It also has a lot of the flaws of mid-century novels, for like writers sorts of books, which is it's way too long. It's over 500 pages, and a lot of those 500 pages are kind of sprawling, repetitive discussions and dialogues between characters where they're philosophizing about the nature of improvement and mediocrity, or they're just kind of telling jokes back and forth. One gets the feeling reading this book that Elkin was pretty unwilling to set aside a good joke or a good punchline if he could find a way to kind of cram it in. So the book definitely suffers from a lack of kind of editorial clarity. But at the same time, as a kind of shaggy dog, long sprawling sort of novel, it's really enjoyable to read. Like, it's not a hard or challenging book, because the jokes just come at you a mile a minute and you find yourself laughing at basically every other page. So I don't know if I would recommend this book to very many people. It takes a certain kind of reader that's very interested in mid-20th century writing, is really interested in postmodernism, has a certain type of humor, likes a certain type of humor. I would say that Elkin brings in a lot of the kind of references to television that you see in the work of like Thomas Pynchon and later, and someone like David Foster Wallace. Like, there's a lot of parts of it that read kind of like a sitcom, or as I said in my earlier video, there's a lot of parts of it that feel kind of Monty Python-esque. So I don't know that I would recommend this book to a lot of people, but I think for folks that are interested in this sort of thing, I think it's a novel that is worth pursuing. Definitely a novel that it does not sound like is a great place to start with Elkin from all the other people I've talked to, who are more experienced readers of him than I am. But I think it's a book that I'm going to keep reading, a book that I'm going to keep laughing along with and enjoying, even if other folks are much kind of cooler on it than I am. Finally, the book that I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about that I finished, about a month and a half ago, but it's gotten a lot of discussion online, kind of mixed discussion, and that I wanted to throw kind of my opinion and hat into the circle, is Shadow Ticket by Thomas Pynchon. So, Pynchon's one of my favorite novelists. Reading Gravity's Rainbow in my early 20s was a kind of transformative reading experience for me. It was a book that really changed my view of what a novel could do, and how kind of expansive and dense a book could be. And it's a book that proved to me that you really cannot understand a good novel, by reading it once. I definitely did not understand everything Gravity's Rainbow the first time around. I know that I've read it a couple more times. I still don't know that I understand it any better than I did the first time. But it's a book that I'm constantly was finding new ways of understanding it, new bits that I missed. So it really changed my whole approach to the novel. So with that, I've always been an enthusiastic Pynchon reader. I've read many of his novels. I've been saving against the day for years, because I just know that I'm going to love it, but I don't want to read it and then not have it there for me anymore. So, I'm a big fan of Pynchon's work, and so I ran out and got Shadow Ticket, his new novel, and jumped right in to it when I got it. Put everything else aside. And My experience with it was very positive. I enjoyed the novel. I think it shows, particularly for somebody that's in his late 80s, that Pynchon still has got a lot of valuable and interesting insights into American history and the kind of character of American society. But I was surprised to find that a lot of people did not like this novel. So I want to share a little bit of kind of what I liked about it and the type of reader that I think might enjoy a book like Shadow Ticket. So I think what I really liked about Shadow Ticket, I don't think it's one of Pynchon's best novels. I don't think it's up there with Gravity's Rainbow or Mason and Dixon. I would even put it probably below a book like Vineland, which has obviously gotten a lot of attention this year, but is seen as usually like a second tier sort of Pynchon novel. But what I would say this book does a very good job of is, I think it's one of his most nakedly political novels, and a book that kind of pushes a really clear and interesting kind of political claim. So it follows a detective who is basically made his bones as kind of a strikebreaker, a person who's mobilized against the working class. Folks who have read Vineland will find some parallels to some of the historical chapters or historical parts of Vineland in the early part of Shadow Ticket. Shadow Ticket then moves as this man who's now become a detective gets an assignment to try to find a missing cheese heiress. And so his travels trying to find this missing person take him first to New York City, very briefly, before jumping on a boat to Europe. And most of the second half of the novel takes place in Europe. And so you're kind of going along with this not very worldly, not very educated American protagonist who's kind of dropped in the middle of a Europe that's spiraling out of control. This novel is taking place mostly in the 1930s. You're seeing the emergence of Nazism, fascism, hardening of the Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. So our narrator or our protagonist is not somebody that's really familiar or really understands these movements very well. So we're seeing these all kind of at the margins and as a kind of novel or new way of looking. But what I think Pynchon does a very nice job of here, and one of the reasons why I like it, and there's not really so much spoilers, I'm not going to give away any plot points here, but kind of what I think he does well, is he gives us a really great exploration of Europe that is spiraling out of control. You have these kind of motorcycle gangs, motorcycle groups that are kind of riding around Eastern Europe. You've got strange British Secret Service or British intelligence service folks that are wandering around and popping in and out. But there's a descending darkness that you feel throughout the second half of the novel, even if our main character doesn't understand it. That I think is just a really compelling and interesting way of exploring a Europe on the edge of the abyss. And so I think Pynchon deserves a ton of credit for capturing that sort of feeling, that sort of dread, that darkness. So I would be really interested now actually to go back and read Gravity's Rainbow and see kind of how Shadow Ticket leads us into Gravity's Rainbow, or it departs significantly from the kind of World War II novel of Gravity's Rainbow. So this is the kind of pre-war, and then you can get into World War II and see, you know, how much has Pynchon changed in his views or his thinking about this broader era in the, 40, 50 years between the two novels. Who do I think would like this book? If you're a Pynchon enthusiast, I think you're going to love it still. I think there's still a lot there of his kind of classic paranoid style that you're going to love. The density is not quite as dense as maybe his big books, but there's still a lot going on. There's a lot to deep dive into. So if you're a Pynchon enthusiast, you're going to like it. I think if you're somebody that's interested in World War II or the origins of World War II or the 1930s, I think this is also a very interesting novel. Having just read The Iron Heel, a 1909 book that's kind of looking forward into the near future, that was interesting to think about what Jack London got right in 1909, thinking about what could happen in the 20s and 30s and what he got totally wrong. So I think if you're interested in that period, you're going to find a lot to like. And then I think if you go in without a lot of expectations, I think that you're going to like it. I think one of the things that really hurt this book when it was released, at least among critics, was when you have an all-time great novelist like Pynchon getting towards the end of their career, the end of their life. I think the expectations and the anxiety of what that person is going to produce really start to exceed the possibility. We rarely have somebody like Cormac McCarthy who releases an incredible novel right at the eve of his death. In most cases, novelists do lose some of their edge as they get much older. So I think if you go into this book and you're thinking, I'm going to get a really good novel that's going to portray a historical period, the 1930s, that I'm interested in, I think you're going to like this book a lot. So that's basically my kind of review of Shadow Ticket by Thomas Pynchon. I would definitely still recommend it. I think it's a very good novel. It's still going to be one of my best new reads of 2025. So if you're still interested, if you're interested in reading the late work of a great master, I would definitely recommend picking up Shadow Ticket. So that's my update for this week. I'm going to hopefully finish up Gate of the Sun and George Mills this week, so I'll have some new books to talk about next week. But as we look forward, we're starting to get towards the end of the year, so keep your eye on this channel, like and subscribe so that you can get all of the end-of-year updates, including my favorite books of 2025, some surprise reads of 2025, and then looking into my most anticipated books of 2026. And 2026 is already shaping up to be a very exciting year for anybody that's interested in literature. So thanks for joining me. Have a great reading week, and I will catch you next week with what I'm reading.